Well, the situation was extremely active, one which was very, very dynamic. We had a great need for uh, offering places where artists could have this possibility to show their works. And actually, St. James was one of those incentives to fulfill this need. As you know, the history of spaces in Malta mostly started with the Museum of Archaeology in Valletta, especially in the 60s, when the artists started to meet and group together and exhibit there. Eventually, it will move to the National Museum of Fine Arts, which established a record of exhibitions almost on a weekly basis. And this, of course, developed a lot of enthusiasm, and it brought many other people who generally were not visiting museums or interested in art. And therefore, there was a need that we could not cope with spaces. So where St. James actually comes in this particular context, where it provided an alternative space. However, I do not think St. James was simply another space, right? It was a new space that addressed this need, and it addressed it differently and professionally. Remember, the Spazju Kreattiv, St. James Cavalier, as it was called at the time, it was not a museum. It was never conceived as a museum. It was conceived as a celebration of culture and of the artistic talent of Maltese as well as foreign artists who visited us, exchange programs, and therefore it developed a whole new set of ideals like educational programs, for example, involvement of schools. I'm not saying these were not involved in the museums before, but we started combining things. It eventually brought also the importance and the need for further structuring, like the Arts Council, for example. So it really filled a need. So I wouldn't say the situation before St. James and after was really any different. It really addressed a very specific need. And when we were called to join for the first board for this St. James, we actually, my tenure was 3 years, from 2000 till the end of 2003. But actually, we were the first. So we started a year in advance, maybe short of a month or two in 1999, which was a very interesting, dynamic period of preparations. And in 1999, when we were called to be the board members, nobody had really a proper agenda. All right, so we had to figure it out. We had to be briefed what this St. James was going to be. And the idea was to call a number of different people who became the board members from different disciplines: theater, music, writing. Were from very, very different backgrounds, newspapers, you name it. And art, of course. And we started to discuss ideas. But most of the time before we started to talk, we had to be briefed what this is going to be. And straight away, we fell into an area where it was always about problem solving, because there were great tensions. For example, the design was still in the making. We had to make sure deadlines are met, always with the possibility that it might not be finished on time. Remember, this was meant to be the inauguration for Millennium 2000. And therefore, we found ourselves really caught in all of this, when, of course, most of the time we were actually meant to specialize in our area, in my case, the visual arts. As far as I'm concerned, I learned a lot from this group, because there was a lot of sharing of ideas and expertise. And I believe I was nominated to serve when I was contacted in '99 to represent somebody from the University of Malta. Now, of course, I wasn't working full-time at the University of Malta. I was simply part-time and always remained part-time. And Anyway, I remember Father Peter Sergino Glot, who called me and he said, we would like to nominate you to represent the visual arts. It was a great honor for me. I accepted. And I was already involved at the time at university with the Cooperativa Culturali Universitaria, the famous KKU, where we were holding exhibitions at the foyer Certemis Meet on a regular basis, since I was teaching with the art unit, which was part of the Faculty of Architecture at the time. Today, it's Faculty of Arts with the Humanities. So this was the setting, all right? And after we started to get involved in problem solving, the idea was, of course, to unite the arts. St. James is visual arts, it's music, it's theater, it's writers, it's drama, it's everything all together. And that was, of course, the idea of sharing the disciplines. And that's when we started to specialize. And when I started to, of course, set up a program for the visual arts, one of the first things I asked that I needed was to be assisted by some other people, so that it's not me dictating things, but it will be a more collective idea. And of course, everything had to be discussed and approved by the board meeting. One thing that was very new for the time, in my opinion, which now that I'm abroad, I find it's a norm, and it was shocking to me for the first time, was that the chairman, the person who's going to run these meetings, was a person who claimed straight away as he opened his mouth, he said, I am not into the arts. I know very little about arts. You have to tell me what to do. So I said, well, what is this? How come he's going to run the center? Later, I realized how important that role was, because today, many times in museums, in galleries, yes, you need somebody who knows the makeup of art, but you always need somebody who is a good administrator. You need somebody who knows how to get finances and things like that, things that it never even occurred to me. And today we know that you cannot run a center like St. James Cavalier, like Spazju Kreattiv, if you do not have a plan of what is your budget, of where the money is going to come from. And I also fell into all of this, which was very beneficial to me, because every time we came up with good ideas, the first question was, how much does it cost? How are you going to finance it? Otherwise, we cannot even talk about it. As beautiful and as great as this idea can be. And that was a very good way of tackling these things, because as we know, artists are not the best organizers. Artists are not the best in uniting together. We have many such problems, and we need an administrator, we need somebody into economics, we need somebody into business in order to be able to do that. And that chairman was Chris Gregg, as you know. And at the time we were meeting in his offices, we were meeting in different places. We were not even meeting at St. James. St. James, we started meeting maybe like 4 or 5 months before it opened, when it was still a construction site, and we simply went to visit, and we were speaking with Professor Richard England to explain to us and become familiar with this new place and how it's going to develop. And it was still, although it was all on the plan, it was still very flexible. There were many things that were proposed and eventually changed in the design, and we played a part in that. And that's how we came up then with the visual arts program, for which I was very much involved for 3 years. And we can speak about that later. So once things were falling in place, we wanted to make sure this inauguration is, a big grand opening, obviously. We never had such a center, and it was very important, and it was actually placing Valletta before Valletta became the cultural city of Europe. It was really putting Valletta on the map. And we wanted to have a major event. And I proposed that we have an exhibition that gives a panoramic view, a general view of the state of art in Malta, which eventually became called Art in Malta Today. However, prior to that, the committee was more thinking of some international exhibition. And I was objecting to it because I said, this is a celebration of us in Malta. Let's not keep on promoting the foreign artist. Let's promote ourselves first. And once we establish that, then we can share with foreigners. I have no problem with foreign artists. But do not put our position from the very beginning as if we are second rate. That was my position. Eventually, this idea was accepted, and we came up with the idea of Art in Malta Today. It was a very ambitious exhibition, obviously. I was appointed the curator for it, and I started to plan a rationale for it. And the first thing I asked was for Father Peter Sergino Glott, with whom I had regular meetings at university, as I said, at the famous farmhouse for Cooperativa Culturali, Universitaria, to contribute an article on the subject, because he had several times lectured and discussed this subject even with me. And he did. And then I did another article myself. And that was the second important objective, which was that this exhibition is not just an exhibition, but it has to be documented with a publication. And as you know, we came up with this publication, the Art in Malta Today, which was quite a handsome catalog. And that was one of my first priorities. I said, if we want to be different, if we want to move forward, we need to be selective in what kind of exhibitions we have. In other words, they have to be vetted, they have to be of a certain standard. We cannot allow everybody to come in, although this is open for everybody, but we have to be selective. And they have to be documented, and that's where again the money comes in, because a publication like this obviously costs a lot of money. And I insisted that if possible, all the major events, I'm talking visual arts now, have to be documented with some publication of some kind. So St. James eventually became, at least the first 3 years I was there, for sure, I know that they were accompanied with regular publications, all of them, big or small. This is an example of a small one, which is a brochure, but it is an international artist, Brigitte Macram, and others were, of course, catalogs and publications properly in book form. And it became like a standard. I said like a standard-bearing example of what documentation should be about. Today, of course, I mostly work on documentation. And it was very ambitious, as I said, to bring all these artists together, incorporating painting, sculpture, ceramics, video, installation, photography, in order to show exactly all the different developments taking place. There were some drawbacks. For example, some artists did not accept the invitation, so I thought that it's very important to have them included, but they were not. So of course there was some criticism, how come this artist is not there and the other one? And I tried to answer some of these questions in the papers at the time. But anyway, it was a very successful exhibition, I think. And since it was documented in this way, we have a kind of an examination. More than a celebration, the exhibition for the inauguration of the center, it was more of an examination of where we are. It was, even if you read the articles, it's about analysis of the state of the arts. How can we move forward from here? Is there anything where it seems we're lagging behind? So this was the posing of the question. And we went further than that because we involved, as I said earlier on, an educational program. At the time, I was a coordinator for 7 years with the Faculty of Education, training our teachers. And I wanted to involve that dimension because, as we know, in fact, today, many faculties from the university actually bring students' work exhibited there for the public to see and to be up to date what's going on. That's exactly the direction we wanted to go. And I remember taking my students, all of whom are, of course, in the teaching profession now, and we discussed all the theories we had on pedagogy, methodology, and what have you, and we wanted to put something in practice. And we came up with art in Malta today, but it was the workbook for children, all right? And this was something that went exactly hand in hand with the exhibition, but it had worksheets. The worksheets were simple sheets, as you can see. This is worksheet 1 with a sculpture that was included by Anton Ajus. And in the end, at the back rather, it had a set of questions, games, you name it, filling in the blanks, activities, learning vocabulary. And the experiment was that I only highlighted 10 of the exhibits, and the 10 were a cross-section of the exhibits, all right? So we couldn't do everything. It was accompanied by a notes for teachers, and this gave a glossary, it gave specific instructions, it explained to teachers how this works, all right? And of course, we took care that it was also translated in Maltese, all right? These were meant for both primary and secondary schools, and they were designed in such a way that depending on the level, all right, the teacher addresses the question. So it was planned in a way that if you are 12 years old, you answer in a particular way. If you are 8 years old, you can answer the same question, but with a different understanding. And this was also meant to be a possibility of how our exhibitions should be. And it was, of course, being the first, it was attended heavily by people. Then we started having seminars for teachers. I started inviting people from abroad to give training sessions. And there was like a small fee that you pay. So there was a revenue coming in. Everything was very reasonable. And this is how it worked. And I think we have to continue to show the importance that an exhibition is not just an event and it ends when the exhibition is put down, but actually have a documentation that remains. In fact, we can still refer to it today. Plus, of course, an educational program that goes with it. This, of course, is involving more work, but this is the way we have to go. The only way to go is to be as professional as possible. And professional is not just a word, it is something you have to earn it through your work. And this is an example of how, at the time, we felt things should go. I remember when we received these very large, beautiful Passmore prints, some of which are over 6 feet long, originals signed and in pencil and numbered and everything with certificate of authenticity and everything. To send them from London framed, that large size, was a nightmare. And I remember Marlborough Gallery said, you know what, we cannot do it unless you can do it. And obviously I was trying to put the expenses on them to ship them. We said, listen, the board is going to honor him with this exhibition. We can pay the catalog, we can do the everything, but you have to give us something. Anyway, and they, for the first time in their history, they decided to send them unframed. This means that you have to roll them in a tube, which is not highly recommended, but since the works were so large and there were so many of them, they were ready to do that. And obviously, we accepted in the name of the board. I'm not going to say I accepted, it was the board that accepted, and they came. So I had another problem, which was framing them when they were in Malta. I'm saying I had to frame them because the job fell on me, you know. So St. James had to frame them. So the issue said, where are we going to frame them? And I kept my mouth shut on that because I didn't want to name any particular framer as if I have an interest in it. And anyway, St. James gave me a name, which I'm not going to mention, a professional framing house. And I said, fine, then I will go. I'll take them personally. We had the gloves, you know, to open them because paper is very delicate, etc. Once they arrived, beautiful work. We opened, it couldn't even fit in the gallery there where we were. And we decided, with the help even of John, that they should have plexiglass so that it doesn't break easily, because glass would be extremely heavy and possibly it breaks. And only a very simple frame, we call it a box frame, which is just the color of natural pine wood, light color. And that was decided. And that's what we did. So they started working on them. And one fine day, I received a phone call. They say, Joseph, brought us these things. I said, yes. They said, listen, we're working on them. You can come and see the work at the workshop. And I went several times at St. Juan somewhere. And in one of these conversations, they said, Joseph, you know, remember, these are abstract works, all right? A circle, a line, a dot, a splash of blue and green, that's what these are. And we can see some of them, like the one on the cover, all right? But these are on acid-free special printing paper, printed at the Ars Studios in Rome, a very famous printing house. And they told me, but there is so much paper extra outside. They said, can we cut a little bit because it is so big, it is such a waste. I said, don't you even dare to cut it, because that's part of the artwork. And I almost had a fit. I said, I will finish in prison as well with you if you do that, you know. So that was quite an issue about the Passmore prints, because for them they didn't mean anything, you know. This is non-objective, non-figurative art, and they thought the paper is too big for nothing, but actually every bit of white space was part of the work. Yes, St. James gave a major boost and contribution to the arts in general. I again keep on focusing on the visual arts. In fact, I think what we are witnessing is what we should be witnessing, which is a surge of new blood, a new spirit. Generally, it is very young people. That's how it started. I remember myself when I was barely 17, 18, coming from my studies in Italy. I thought I can change the world, and I was doing things I wouldn't even dream of, but that's when you actually can do such things. And these are people who are trained differently than we were trained. They have priorities which are different. They understand the times in which they're living in a different way that I understand the times who come from a previous generation. And for that reason, they are filling in this scene, this emerging young scene of modern artists. And for that reason, it's not putting aside the older generation. That's not how it goes. It's all about building up and offering a sense of continuity. But they are offering this new optimistic view of what can happen in the future. In saying so, the problem where we started with this conversation about spaces actually remains, because one of the phenomena that always intrigued me about art in Malta and art education in Malta is that there is so much interest, there is so much investment in it. When I say investment, energy, I'm talking, not necessarily money. That it is very surprising, not only because of the diminutive size of the island, but also because until recent years, art education was how do you say, a part-time affair. All right, the Malta Government School of Art, for example, until my generation was still an evening school. It wasn't day school, and now I believe it's a day school as well. And for that reason, I cannot understand how come we are producing so much interest, enthusiasm. I wouldn't say artists, but people involved in the arts, okay? Because we are not really training them, all right? So it is a genuine interest, so there must be something happening from these places like St. James, like the museum, that of course started to help this development. As you know, since the opening of St. James, then we have the new Musa now, we have Mikas, we have Valletta Contemporary. Unfortunately, galleries, every time they open, they always have a very short lifespan and they go bankrupt or they are forced to close. And there is a whole history of those. The only exception would be obviously Galleria Fenici at the Mediterranean Conference Center, which gave a contribution, which obviously is included in my publication of Volume 2, which is the Pioneers of Modern Art in Malta, because it played such a significant role. So we are in a situation where more or less we should be. But this idea of need of places where to show actually remains with the center or without it. And that's why we're seeing the emergence of these places that I have just mentioned. Notwithstanding all of this, we are in a phase where today you can exhibit in Republic Street, for that matter. You know, we have art forms where you just go in a main square. You can go in a disused chapel. You can go in a hotel. You can go in a restaurant. So today, the boundaries are open. And yet, we still feel that there is such a demand. And this brings us to another problem, which is planning an itinerary for these exhibitions. I remember, and I don't think it has changed, to tell you the truth, that we are used to, which is unfortunate, to organize at the spur of the moment. All right, you receive an email, we are going to do an exhibition in 2 months, and this is it, and this is how it's going to be. Places like the ones I'm mentioning, and this professionality that I was telling you, you have to have a plan a year in advance, okay? So at least. And for that reason, you need a lot of planning before. So it is a very promising situation, I think. Today, I mean, leaving the pandemic aside for a while, travel is so easy. I see many of my students, all of whom went abroad and came back, some even stayed, some are still carrying their studies. So there are opportunities today, and this is, of course, bringing a new breed of artists, and I'm looking forward to see where this is actually going to take us. This means that the role played by an art center, or may I say an international art center that embraces all the arts, is very necessary for the island of Malta. The role it has to play is still in its infancy, and it has to continue to grow. So we need more to invest in it. We have to make sure that the activities that we have, whether it's music, whether it is local, whether it's international, whether it's theater, are always of the highest caliber, because you are on a national level and international level. That is highly important. So you need a board of professional people who can vet all these activities. I think We are in a phase where we can afford to be choosy, not whoever applies, you open the door and you get in, so that you maintain a certain level. And as I said, you have to maintain a program which is well established in advance, of course, with contingent plans if something happens or something doesn't turn up, because this, after all, is all human. These things do happen, with also a balance of both local and international arts. So yes, St. James has an important role to play, and I think that is the way to the future.